Kyoto, Japan, October 8, 1594. The morning air is heavy, damp with the scent of burning wood, but laced with something darker, more unforgettable. It draws the crowd closer. Shoulder to shoulder, peasants in ragged cotton, merchants in fine silk, monks with shaved heads, samurai with hands on their sword hilts. All have gathered at Nanzen-ji Temple, not to pray, but to witness. In the center of the clearing sits a black iron cauldron, wide as a horse cart, its rim trembling with the weight of boiling oil. Steam curls upward like ghostly fingers clawing at the autumn sky. The surface bubbles and hisses, promising a death that is both spectacle and lesson. The condemned kneel nearby, their wrists bound. One is a man, broad-shouldered even under restraint, his hair wild and dark, matted with sweat and dirt. Beside him clings a boy no older than 7, trembling not with cold but with a terror so pure it radiates outward, infecting even the hardened onlookers. The man is Ishikawa Goemon. The boy is his son. Soon, they will both be lowered into that cauldron, and Kyoto will witness a death unlike any it has seen before. The crowd does not turn away. They lean closer, their breaths shallow. Some are here out of duty, compelled by orders, others by morbid fascination, but for many, especially the poor and powerless, there is another reason. They have come to see a legend die. It is said that a man's death can sometimes reveal more than his life. Yet to understand this execution, to understand why Goemon, once whispered about as a folk hero, now kneels bound with his child, you must step back, far back, into the world that forged him. A Japan torn apart by civil war. A land where survival and honor danced constantly on the knife's edge. And where even the smallest choices might echo across centuries. The year is 1558. Japan bleeds. The Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, has already raged for a century, scattering villages and shattering families beneath the ambitions of rival warlords. Provinces rise and fall in the span of months. Peasants sow rice knowing that marauding soldiers might reap it first. Temples that should offer sanctuary instead house mercenaries or hoard wealth to purchase safety. It is into this chaos that a child is born in Iga province, a region both famous and feared for producing ninja. His name, at first, is Sanada Kuranoshin, son of a samurai family loyal to the Miyoshi clan. His fate might have been ordinary by samurai standards: service, loyalty, and death in battle for his lord. But history is never so predictable. One night, when Kuranoshin is only 15, the fragile order of his world collapses. The Ashikaga Shogunate, enemies of the Miyoshi, descend on his home with fire and steel. The boy watches helplessly as his parents are cut down. His father, Ishikawa Akashi, marked for death not by dishonor or crime but by allegiance in a war that shifts as easily as sand in a storm. When the killers vanish into the dark, only bodies remain, the floor stained with blood, the air thick with silence. Kuranoshin stands over the corpses, his young hands shaking as he grips his father's sword, still warm from battle. That night, the boy dies. In his place rises something else, a shadow harder, angrier, more dangerous. In the mountains of Iga, where valleys are shrouded in mist and danger is woven into the soil, the orphaned youth finds his way to a hidden school. Here, under the ruthless discipline of Momochi Sandayu, one of the most feared ninja masters of his age, Kuranoshin is remade. The world of the ninja is unlike the rigid honor code of the samurai. To the samurai, glory lies in loyalty and open battle. To the ninja, glory is survival itself. Silence is armor. Deception is a blade. Shadows are refuge. The boy studies night after night. He learns how to read the patterns of guards, how to vanish into bamboo forests, how to kill with a single strike. He learns the art of kuji-in, hand signs said to focus spirit and mind, and the craft of poisons brewed from herbs and minerals. In an age of turmoil, these skills are as valuable as armies. He is taught that honor is not found in dying for one's lord, but in living long enough to complete one's mission. Yet, even here among shadows, the boy's heart betrays him. History remembers only fragments. That he fell in love with one of Sandayu's concubines, a woman whose beauty rivaled any court lady. Her name is lost, but her place in his downfall is not. Desire in such a world was weakness. When the affair is discovered, the master demands punishment, exile or death. Kuronoshin chooses exile, but before leaving, he commits an act that will forever brand him an outcast. From his master's armory, he steals a sword, a blade of legendary craftsmanship, so finely made that some whisper it sang with its own spirit. In that theft lies both defiance and destiny. A runaway ninja is worse than an enemy soldier. He is a traitor to the shadows themselves. And so Sanada Kuronoshin disappears. From the mist and silence of Iga emerges a new name, a new life, Ishikawa Goemon, a man without master, without home, but carrying with him skills few could match and a fury that burned hotter than the oil that would one day claim his life. Exile is a peculiar kind of death. When Sanada Kuronoshin left the hidden valleys of Iga, he shed not only his name but also his belonging. In the world of the ninja, there was no forgiveness for betrayal, no second chance for those who walked away carrying secrets. He was a Nukanin, a runaway shinobi, hunted not just by enemies but by his own kind. To be cast out of Iga was to be severed from the only family he had left. Condemned to wander through a war-torn Japan where every village eyed strangers with suspicion and every lord demanded proof of loyalty before offering protection. But Kuronoshin, soon to be Goemon, was not an ordinary exile. He carried with him the stolen blade of Momochi Sandaiu, a weapon whose edge was as sharp as his memory of loss. Legends say the sword itself shimmered when drawn under moonlight, as if it remembered its master's wrath and the betrayal that had torn it from its rightful place. To wield it was to carry both power and curse. He slipped through the mountains into the Kansai region, where the wealth of merchants fattened cities like Osaka and Kyoto, and the palaces of lords gleamed even as peasants starved outside their gates. Here, Goemon first learned the art of living in shadows not as a tool of a lord, but for himself. He was free, yet freedom in Sengoku Japan was dangerous, for without a master, a man was little more than a rogue. Still, the skills of the Iga ninja were not easily forgotten. He moved like liquid night, scaling walls that seemed impregnable, vanishing into thickets where even dogs could not follow. In the alleys of Osaka, whispers spread of a stranger who could pass through barred windows as though he were smoke. Merchants spoke in hushed tones of break-ins that left no trace save for the empty chests where gold once lay. Guards swore they saw only a flicker, a shadow, before their lanterns sputtered out and silence reclaimed the night. Yet Goemon was no common thief. If greed had been his only hunger, he might have vanished quickly, just another outlaw cut down by samurai or crucified on the roadside as a warning. Instead, his thefts bore a peculiar signature. The plundered riches rarely stayed with him. Grain, rice, and coin were found mysteriously on the doorsteps of widows, in the hands of crippled beggars, or quietly delivered to sick families with no hope of paying for medicine. This was no accident. In a Japan riven by inequality, his thefts were an act of war. The Sengoku period had created staggering contrasts. Peasants bled to feed armies. Merchants exploited desperation to build fortunes. Temples hoarded donations that never reached the hungry. Daimyo stockpiled treasure even as villages withered. Into this world, Goemon inserted himself not merely as a thief but as a redresser of balance. The people, desperate for symbols, gave him one. They whispered of him as if he were more spirit than man. A phantom who punished the proud and lifted the poor. Children sat around hearth fires hearing stories of the noble outlaw who defied samurai arrogance. A merchant in Kyoto would wake to find his lockbox emptied, while a village miles away would awaken to find bags of rice stacked neatly at its gates. But if the common folk adored him, the powerful seethed. For lords and merchants, Goemon was not a folk hero but a threat to the very order they depended upon. Each theft mocked their supposed invulnerability. Each rumor that spread among the poor fanned the flame of rebellion. Goemon himself seemed to understand that legend was as potent a weapon as any sword. He played into it, striking at wealthy homes on moonless nights. Ensuring word of his deeds spread quickly, his band of followers grew, loyal not through obligation but through belief in his mission. They too became phantoms, a brotherhood of shadows. Still, legends are dangerous things. The more he gave to the poor, the more the poor revered him. But the more his name was spoken in awe. the more it drew the gaze of men who could not abide defiance. And above them all stood Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man who, like Goemon, had been born to nothing, but who had clawed his way to rule nearly everything. It was only a matter of time before the outlaw in the shadows and the ruler in the light would see their paths converge. Imagine Osaka in the 1580s, a city alive with trade. Lanterns flickering against lacquered shop fronts. The shouts of vendors hawking rice and sake drifting into the night. Wealth coursed through its streets like a river, but it pooled in only a few hands. Merchants grew fat from coastal trade. Daimyo flaunted silks and swords imported from China, and temples stacked offerings until their storerooms bulged with coin. Meanwhile, just outside the city gates, peasants in straw cloaks bent double in flooded paddies, their children gaunt from hunger. This imbalance was the perfect stage for Goemon's emergence as more than a runaway ninja. One story, whether entirely true or embellished through countless retellings, speaks of a moonless night when Goemon crept across the tiled roof of a wealthy Osaka merchant. The guards below, drowsy and confident in their master's riches, barely stirred. Inside, the merchant slept wrapped in embroidered blankets, his dreams no doubt filled with profit and expansion. But when he awoke, it was not silk that greeted him, it was the chill of steel at his throat. "Your wealth is not yours," Goemon is said to have whispered. "It belongs to those who gave you their sweat, their rice, their lives." By dawn, the merchant's lockboxes lay bare, his silver seals scattered as proof of his humiliation. But miles away in the villages, poor farmers discovered grain sacks at their doors. A widow found coins clinking inside a wooden bowl she had left empty on her threshold. A sick child received medicine bought with gold that once lined a merchant's storeroom. These acts of redistribution transformed theft into a message that the rich could not grow fat while the poor starved in silence. The people began to whisper his name. In markets and teahouses, he was spoken of with awe, as though he were a divine spirit wearing human skin. Mothers soothed crying children with promises that Goemon would protect them. Farmers, bowed under crushing taxes, saw in him a figure who dared to do what they could not, strike back at the mighty. In their hearts, Goemon was not a thief but a justice bringer, a balance restorer. And yet, this reputation was dangerous. The Sengoku period was an age when stories traveled faster than armies. Each theft was not just a wound to a merchant's pride but a public humiliation. Retold until it reached the ears of the ruling class, daimyo began to see him not merely as a nuisance but as a spark that could ignite rebellion. Goemon did little to extinguish that spark. In fact, he fanned it. He cultivated his legend carefully, ensuring that his raids struck not only the wealthy but the symbolic. He targeted storehouses of greedy merchants, caravans laden with temple donations, and even the mansions of samurai whose arrogance had become infamous. His followers, now numerous, learned to melt into villages after each raid, vanishing like mist before dawn. To the authorities, this only made him more ghost than man, impossible to pin down. What Goemon offered was not just rice or coin, it was dignity. Every sack of grain that appeared in a starving hamlet reminded the people that someone, somewhere, dared to defy the order that crushed them. Every tale told by candlelight painted him larger than life, until he became less man than myth. Children imagined him with superhuman strength, slipping past guards as easily as water through a sieve. Kabuki troops, centuries later, would immortalize him as a giant who could stride over castle walls. But beneath the stories was a man, clever, reckless, and, above all, dangerous. He lived in the space between admiration and fear, for even the poor who revered him knew he was hunted. To be caught aiding him meant torture or execution. And Goemon himself, though wrapped in legend, must have known each act brought him closer to the gaze of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi was no merchant, no arrogant daimyo easily robbed. He was Japan's rising star, a man who had clawed from the mud of peasantry to the heights of power. If Goemon was a thief of shadows, Hideyoshi was a thief of nations. And when two men born of nothing grow into forces that shape the fate of thousands, their collision becomes inevitable. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's story was as improbable as Goemon's, though their paths curved in opposite directions. Born the son of a peasant foot soldier, Hideyoshi clawed his way upward through cunning, charm, and ruthless pragmatism. Where Goemon had slipped into shadows, Hideyoshi stepped boldly into the light, rising from sandal-bearer to general under Oda Nobunaga, and finally, after Nobunaga's death in 1582, to the position of Japan's most powerful man. By the 1590s, he had subdued the fractious daimyo and proclaimed himself the unifier of Japan, bringing an end to a century of chaos. Yet Hideyoshi's vision of peace was ironbound. He believed order could only be achieved by stamping out disorder at its root. That meant disarming peasants, forbidding the construction of new castles, and crushing any who might undermine authority. He levied harsh taxes to fuel grand projects, including his lavish castles at Osaka and Fushimi. To the common people, his rule often meant little relief from suffering, only a new master under whom they bowed. For Goemon, Hideyoshi was the embodiment of everything he despised. A man who had risen from the same mud as the peasants but had turned his back on them, hoarding wealth and wielding power as mercilessly as any warlord. If Goemon's raids whispered of defiance, Hideyoshi's edicts thundered of control. They were mirror images, both born to nothing, both self-made, both commanding followers through sheer will. But one sought to redistribute wealth, the other to concentrate it. One rebelled in shadows, the other ruled in brilliance. And then, fate turned personal. Goemon's wife, Otaki, a woman said to be as beautiful as she was devoted, was seized by Hideyoshi's agents. Accounts differ. Some say she was executed to punish her husband. Others that she died resisting the capture of their young son. Whatever the truth, the loss shattered Goemon. Theft was no longer enough. His raids were no longer about balance or legend, they became about vengeance. In September 1594, he attempted the impossible. Fushimi Castle, Hideyoshi's crown jewel, stood gleaming white against the Kyoto moon. Layers of guards patrolled its corridors, walls rose high, gates locked tight. But to Goemon, trained in the Iga school, no fortress was truly secure. He slipped inside like a phantom, his stolen sword at his side, moving past guards who never knew he was there. The stories say he reached Hideyoshi's very chamber, where the great unifier lay sleeping on his futon. For a moment, Goemon stood over him, weapon raised, vengeance burning in his chest. Perhaps history might have changed that night, had it not been for a single mistake. His foot brushed against a low table, and a bronze ceremonial bell toppled to the floor. Its clang echoed like thunder through the chamber. In an instant, the castle stirred to life. Guards poured in, swords flashing. Hideyoshi awoke, startled but composed, his calculating eyes already measuring the assassin before him. Surrounded, Goemon had no escape, yet he did not cower. He stood silent, blade in hand, facing the man who had stolen everything from him. Hideyoshi, calm in the face of death, is said to have looked at him and murmured, "So, the great Ishikawa Goemon shows himself at last." The trial was a formality. Before Hideyoshi's court, Goemon stood bound yet unbowed, his presence commanding attention like a storm in the hall. The charges were read: theft, banditry, attempted regicide. To all of them, Goemon confessed without hesitation. His words, however, were not of repentance. "I have stolen from the rich to give to the poor. I have defied those who crush the weak beneath their heels. And yes, I sought your life, Hideyoshi. For you are a tyrant who has forgotten that power is meant to serve the people, not devour them." The hall erupted in whispers of disbelief. No one spoke to Hideyoshi this way, not even his generals. But Goemon, condemned already, had nothing left but truth. "If these are crimes," he declared, "then I am proud to be guilty. If defying injustice is treason, then I am honored to be a traitor. Kill me if you will, but know that others will rise after me. The poor will always find their champions, and tyrants will always face rebellion." The words hung in the air like a curse. Hideyoshi's face remained composed, but those close to him saw the fury simmering in his eyes. For Goemon's speech had not been a plea, it had been a direct challenge to the legitimacy of his rule. The sentence, when it came, silenced even the hardened courtiers. Death by boiling, a punishment so rare, so horrific, that it was reserved for crimes deemed unforgivable. And Hideyoshi added a cruelty that froze the hall. Goemon's young son would share his fate. At last, the outlaw's composure cracked. His voice, until then strong and steady, faltered as he pleaded for his child's life. "He is innocent," he begged. "Kill me, but spare him." But Hideyoshi was unmoved. "He carries your blood, your defiance. Japan will be rid of both of you." Thus, the outlaw and his son were led toward a fate meant not only to kill but to erase. To burn away both body and legend in oil and flame. The cell was quiet except for the crackle of distant torches. Goemon sat with his son pressed against his side, his arms bound but his spirit unbroken. The boy, no more than 7, looked up with wide, searching eyes. "Papa," he whispered, "are we going to die tomorrow?" Goemon hesitated, then nodded. He had always believed in truth, even when it was cruel. "Yes, tomorrow." The child was silent for a long moment, his small body trembling. Then came the next question, one that struck harder than any sword. "Will it hurt?" Goemon closed his eyes. "Yes. Will you be with me?" At that, the outlaw bent down, pressing his forehead to his son's. "Always. I will never let go." That night, he composed his jisei, a death poem. As was the custom of condemned men in Japan. "Though you may boil a thief's body," he wrote, "you cannot boil away his spirit. Thieves will always exist as long as there are rich and poor." In those lines, he gave his life not only meaning but defiance, setting himself within an eternal struggle that outlived kings and conquerors. Dawn came, merciless and swift, at Nanzen-ji Temple in Kyoto. The execution ground filled with people from every station of life, peasants clutching their sleeves, merchants leaning forward with morbid curiosity, monks whispering sutras, and samurai standing stiff with discipline. In the center, the great iron cauldron awaited, its black surface glistening in the morning sun. The oil within bubbled, steam rising in spectral curls. The fire beneath had burned since before dawn. Stoked to a fury, Goemon and his son were led forward in chains. Hideyoshi himself sat upon a raised platform, expression carved in stone, his eyes cold as he watched. The executioner explained the procedure with clinical detachment. They would be lowered in slowly, feet first, so the agony would last. There would be no mercy. The boy clung tighter to his father, and Goemon whispered, "Remember what I told you. I will not let go." When guards tried to separate them, Goemon summoned a strength born of desperation. He lifted his son high above his head, his bound arms straining, holding the child aloft as though to shield him from the cauldron below. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was not how executions unfolded. The condemned were supposed to submit, to vanish quietly into suffering. But here was a father, even at the edge of death, defying the script written for him. "Take me first," he cried, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Let the boy's death be swift." The executioner hesitated, glancing toward Hideyoshi. The ruler gave only the faintest nod, and the chains began to lower. Goemon's feet touched the oil. The scream tore from his throat as flesh seared. But he did not drop his son. Inch by inch, the chain descended, his legs, then waist, then chest disappeared into the boiling death. And still he held the child aloft. The crowd could scarcely breathe. Some wept openly, others turned their faces away. Even hardened warriors shifted uncomfortably. For what they witnessed was not simply punishment, it was love made visible. Carved in agony. At last, his strength faltered, his arms trembled, the boy beginning to slip. And then, in one final act that would etch itself into legend, Goemon thrust his son down into the cauldron, plunging him beneath the oil so death would come instantly rather than slowly. The scream was cut short, and when Goemon lifted the lifeless body once more above his head, it was no longer a gesture of protection but of defiance. A final banner raised against tyranny. His gaze locked on Hideyoshi, eyes burning with such hatred and sorrow that witnesses later swore the air grew colder. And then he too sank beneath the surface, his body consumed by flame and oil, leaving only silence. Hideyoshi had intended the execution as a warning, a spectacle so terrible that none would dare defy him again. Instead, it gave birth to a myth. Goemon did not die as a thief, but as a father who turned torture into resistance, whose final act was both mercy and rebellion. The legend spread like wildfire. In time, Even the iron cauldron itself became part of his memory. The great communal baths of Japan, once simple tubs of hot water, came to be called Goemon Buro, Goemon's bath. What was meant as a symbol of humiliation became instead a symbol of cleansing, of remembrance. Kabuki theaters immortalized him in plays, transforming the outlaw into a giant hero capable of superhuman feats. Woodblock prints depicted him leaping across rooftops or glaring defiantly from within the cauldron. Storytellers embroidered his life until he was less man than spirit, an eternal presence haunting the powerful. Centuries passed, yet his name remained alive on the lips of the people. He became Japan's Robin Hood, a mirror in which each generation saw its struggles reflected. For some, he embodied rebellion against tyranny. For others, the devotion of a father willing to face any pain for his child. His death poem lived on as an anthem for the dispossessed. No oil, no execution, no ruler could boil away the hunger for justice. And so the question he left behind remains, echoing still across the centuries: when power grows unjust, should we bow or resist? Goemon chose resistance, and though it cost him everything, his life, his family, his legacy, it also gave him immortality. The cauldron has long since cooled, its fire extinguished, yet in the still hours of night, when silence settles and the powerful sleep, some say the echo of his defiance can still be heard. A father's voice, unbroken, eternal,